Perkins. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Why did you decide to run for re-election?
I think that I've enjoyed the last 8 years, but I think I've spent a good time of the last 8 years trying to do and work on issues that are important and matter to the people of Wyoming. And I think there's some work left to be done in that regard.
Describe a vote you made that you do differently if you had the chance.
Well, I think the first one that comes to mind is the Senate File 104. Years ago, obviously, if we'd known that it was going to be unconstitutional, I wouldn't have voted for a bill that I knew was going to be unconstitutional. That being said, I did think it was going to be a close call. I did think it would be constitutional because of the rights and powers that the Constitution gives the legislature to oversee and make sure that there's an implementation of a uniform system of education in the state of Wyoming. But that being said, obviously, in hindsight, I would not have voted for a bill that I thought was unconstitutional.
Legislators hiked the gas tax to increase funding for roads, but the boost is really only Band-Aid to a bigger problem there. What would you do? What would you propose for highway funding?
Well, I think that we've got the highway funding is a tricky issue. First of all, it's important to remember that the U.S. highway system and the interstate system are actually the property of the federal government. Certainly, Wyoming receives a significant benefit from that highway system, and so we do have some responsibility to maintain it. But quite frankly, we could throw our entire budget in the interstate system, still not fix the interstate system, and still have the rest of the roads. So I think it's a two-pronged problem. One of them, Washington has to find and get its house in order so that it can fund and its highway system appropriately. That being said, the highway or the gasoline and fuel tax from 2 years ago is a step that will provide a consistent additional source of revenue to both local government and the highway system. The other side of that is we fund a significant amount of projects in Wyoming year to year through the general fund budget. And ultimately it becomes a matter of setting priorities and deciding what you're going to spend your money on. And whether it's game and fish or whether it's the highway department, we have to do what's necessary and have the fiscal discipline to make those commitments and get it done.
You mentioned game and fish. That's also an ongoing problem with the department stuck between rising costs and cap fees. What would you propose as a solution to their woes?
I think that's a multi-pronged solution. First of all, I think and Game and Fish has started to work on this, and I visited with them about this. It's important that I think that they do some kind of marketing analysis. You can't simply raise a hunting fee or a license fee. It's like any kind of pricing. Ultimately, you get to a point where you have diminishing returns. If you raise them too much, you sell fewer licenses, and ultimately raising licenses doesn't necessarily translate into more revenue. So I think they need to do some marketing and some analysis to find out where that pricing ought to be, so we could probably hit the sweet spot on the licenses that we could sell at the prices that they can command. Once you do that, then I think you can identify where the chronic shortfalls are. And also, just to clear up what is sometimes a misconception, the legislature, when it has given a specific task to the Game and Fish, has paid for those types of things. For example, on the wolf reintroduction, there's specific money allocated for wolf reintroduction. There's specific money allocated for sage grouse. There's specific money allocated for various things that they've assigned. But that being said, Wyoming and its wildlife and its fisheries are assets of all the state, and certainly not just hunters and fishermen. Tourism, you look at Yellowstone Park, would we have as many visitors in Yellowstone Park if they couldn't see bison, if they couldn't see bears, if they couldn't see elk or deer? I think the answer is clearly no. So when you look at that and the benefits that the entire state gets from game and fish or the wildlife, and then also you look at the role has changed as we look at the environmental, the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, and the other burdens that have been put on the game and fish to manage our wildlife. That's something that is a burden to all of Wyoming. It's energy, it's recreation, it's access, it's all of those things, and game and fish plays a role in that. And so again, it's coming back. We fund certain things regularly out of the general fund, and if we have to make up that difference between where the license fees ought to be and what it takes to make game fish work effectively, then we need to do that.
What should Wyoming do to strengthen the market for its natural resources, specifically coal?
I think there's a couple things that Wyoming needs to do. One, it needs to continue to work on, like we have been in the past, and we've got exciting projects going on. We need to continue to work on and advance clean coal technologies and advance in those regards. You've also got coal to liquids, which has some exciting prospects to convert coal into diesel, for example. So you've got some things. So you've got R&D, research and development, that needs to happen. I think we need to continue to support that and look to assist in that, like we've done, with the university and other things. Then I think also that you need to continue to recognize that coal is still going to be a player for quite a while, as particularly Wyoming's low sulfur coal. Reducing sulfur dioxide emissions is really important to the environment. And so as we do that, we need to recognize we do have some market advantages in our low sulfur coal. But we also need to expand and look for those markets that are continuing to have it. You have emerging nations that are using that will still be generating coal electricity. I think the governor is doing a good job in working, trying to find coal exports. I think those ultimately will happen. There will be a deepwater port on the west coast. But also, if it's not there, then there's also through the Gulf of Mexico and other places that you can export coal. And we still need to work on that while at the same time advancing and getting ready for the future and the changes that we're going to find in our energy technologies.
With the new term, what would you as a legislature do to improve education?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think that you have to be very, very careful what you ask the legislature to do with regard to education. I'm one of those people that continue to try and support education being controlled at the local level. I think that it's traditionally been that way. I think it works better that way. The State Board of Education needs to be setting the standards, and then the local school boards need to set curriculum to meet those standards. And so I think that the legislature, our job is to provide the resources necessary to achieve those goals and to support that mission of both the state school board and the local school districts. And then I think the other thing is to continue to work on accountability. When for example, I know in Natrona County, I was talking with the folks from the WEA the other day, and they said they think they're very, very close to having the accountability model for both sides, both the school district, the administrators, the board, and the teachers all think they're getting pretty close to having a good accountability model. We'll put that into effect, and then when you have the accountability model put together, then you're able to figure out what's effective and what's not effective from an objective point of view. That'll take care of continuing contract status, for some people call it tenure. That'll take care of a lot of those types of issues that are prickly. And ultimately, Wyoming funds its education at a very high level. We're one of the top in the country, but I don't think we're seeing the results of that. So the legislature needs to continue to provide those resources, provide the accountability, but it needs to be careful in keeping its nose out of getting too specific in those areas and directing education. You do not want education to be a political football, particularly when you get down to curriculum and standards.
Is the science standards footnote part of that?
Well, yeah, I was actually on the conference committee for science standards, for the footnote science standards. And of course, the budget process is an interesting process. How the House had put that in, the Senate hadn't. And so when you go to the conference committee, you have to be somewhere between the Senate position, which was no position at all, and the House position, which had the footnote. We cussed and discussed that footnote for quite a while, and actually quite a bit of the language for the footnote came from Representative Throne, who's a Democrat from Laramie County. From my perspective, what we were trying to do was to set the state school board to have it do its job. The concern I have, again, is local education, and whether it's science standards, whether those science standards are right, wrong, whether they're great or not great, even if they had everything in it we want, I do not think that you want the legislature setting standards for education. That's the job of the state school board in concert with its capacity, and then also the input from local schools, and certainly legislators and the public have a role in that as well. But those standards should be set by the state school board. From my perspective, that footnote was trying to be a directive to say to the state board of education, do the heavy lifting, examine the standards. We want standards that will prepare Wyoming students for their position to be competitive in the global economy. And we do not want to adopt wholesale standards because whether it's the Governors Association, whether it's the foundations and the nonprofits that put those together, whether it's somebody else. We want Wyoming standards, not somebody else's standards. We do not want to abdicate our control over our education of our children to anybody else. Ultimately, state school board, you look at those, you adopt the ones you think that are appropriate for our state. And if they thought those standards were appropriate, then that's their job. If they thought those standards were appropriate with modifications, then that's their job. If they thought those standards were completely out to lunch and they needed a different set of standards, then that's their job to figure those out. And the other thing I would say about standards also is one of the problems I do see with science standards is they get so specific as they drive curriculum. And again, I think that's something that should be reserved to local school boards, is how do you accomplish those standards? Those standards should be the benchmarks for what our students should know in a basic way when they graduate from high school. But they should not be specific that they drive or mandate specific curriculum at the local level.
What's your philosophy in the decision-making process when voting on a controversial issue or an issue on which you have no strong stance?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that again?
What's your philosophy in decision-making process when voting on a controversial issue or regarding an issue on which you have no strong stance?
Well, when I got into this, I always said that I was going to try and do the best that I could, make the best decision I could, and then the chips just have to fall where they may. And if the voters decide that I'm not doing a good job, they have a vote and they can put me out to pasture. In doing that, I'm a person, I do a lot of homework. I try and read the bills very carefully. If you look at my record, they probably don't keep records of who provides amendments, but I probably amend more bills than a lot of people, than most anybody else in the Senate, except for maybe Charlie Scott. But I try and look at that from a very objective point of view and try and do the right thing, what I think is the best thing for Wyoming. And so I look at that. I'll hit the internet, I'll do the research, I'll grab LSO staff, have them see if they can put some information together for me, and then just try and make the best decision I can. And at the end of the day, I try and look at what does this mean? I'm not worried about next year in Wyoming. I'm worried about 5 years out and 10 years out and 20 years out. And so you try and look, do the homework, try and look for the unintended consequences, and then try and look as a general direction. Where does this go? Where does this put us down 5, 10 years? What's the effect of this in the long term? And that's what I try and do, the analysis as I go through and examine legislation. Is either controversial or that there's lots of things I don't have really strong feelings about. God, country, and Wyoming, I would have really strong feelings about. Fiscal responsibility is another thing. Transparency is another thing I have very strong feelings about. But at the end of the day, in the legislature, we handle such a wide variety of topics. You simply can't be passionate about everything.
What should the state's role be in economic development?
Certainly, it should be within the Constitution, but I think the state has unlike my opponent, I think it has a very specific role in economic development. It's not corporate welfare. It's not picking winners and losers. What it's trying to do is provide a backdrop to help build capacity, particularly at the local level, for the economic diversity in your own community. And I think in doing that, you want to be careful. You want to do those things that helping, for example, true infrastructure, streets, roads, sewer, water, safety. Those are definitely appropriate economic functions. River revival, Platte River revival is another, I think, a very significant economic development function. Economic development simply isn't just building roads and buildings or having new businesses. It's also very important to have community development in those things. People don't come and open up new businesses or want to expand or live in places that don't have good schools, don't have some decent amenities, don't have pretty good parks or other recreational opportunities. So community development is another important part of economic development. Air transportation is another. Studies show over and over that air transportation is another vital portion of community development and has a role in economic development. So when you look at all of those things, the state has a role in providing both decent public amenities, decent public facilities and utilities, and then also from time to time, if you're going to be in that game, you have to recognize you have to pay to play. Texas, Iowa, Nevada, Utah. All of those folks are in this game as well, trying to lure and diversify their economy with new jobs or expanding jobs. And so if you're going to pay, you have to have some money. You have to put some money into that, or you just need to get out of the game, because those businesses, that's the environment that we live in, like it or not. And you're either going to be in it or not. That being said, you still have to be within the Constitution. And I think the Amendment 4 process, which was a constitutional amendment from probably 15 years ago, provides very direct infusions for economic development. To private entities, you need to follow and make sure you're within the Constitution and take advantage of the Amendment 4 process for economic development.
We'll wrap it up with this one. Why should we choose you over your opponent, Spotlight?
Well, I think that if you look at the last 8 years, that I've got a record of probably conservative. I think it's conservative record, but I think it's a realistic conservative record, recognizing that Wyoming has a very. My opponent talks about Wyoming being bankrupt and heading for bankruptcy. I don't see it. We continue to put savings. People don't understand that we put probably 40% of severance taxes go to some form of savings or investment every year. We have our rainy day fund, which I think will probably become important in about 2 more years when we have to dip into it to start funding education, because the school foundation program, which pays for education, is probably going to be underwater in the red in about 2 more years. So I think when you look at that, I've got an experience and recognize what the issues are. I'm not a single issue person. If you look at my record on proposed legislation, it covers a broad range from healthcare to liens to economics to finance to wind energy and energy development. So I've got a record that's not a single issue record. I think that, unlike my opponent, I'm focused on Wyoming issues and Wyoming state issues. I understand federal overreach. I've looked at federal overreach. I actively have participated in legislation and legislative efforts to fight the federal government in places where I think they are significantly overreaching. But at the end of the day, I think that you can have someone who digs in, looks at legislation, tries to make it better, with the view to make Wyoming a place that will support and be the Wyoming that we want for us, for our children and our grandchildren, and that I'm focusing on Wyoming issues and not issues at the federal level, and railing at the wind in the federal government in all aspects, but focusing on Wyoming.
Drew Perkins, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.